Basically, the goal here is to minimize pay compression and strive for pay equity. So now we'll go into how to avoid pay compression. Now, you won't always be able to avoid pay compression, but you can avoid quite a bit by simply planning and analyzing. It's recommended to complete impact analyses prior to making any changes. This will help you see how employees stack up against each other. You can determine who else may need a bump in pay because of others receiving increases. Just be proactive and plan ahead, because rushing in reactive situations could result in having less time to analyze, which could cause compression issues. Other ways to potentially avoid pay compression would be to curate well-designed salary grades and ranges. A lot of you may already have that, so if you do, great. If not, that's something that you can always add. You can implement or fine-tune a merit cycle with clear guidelines. Also, regularly conduct market analyses and incorporate market adjustments into your compensation cycle. Now, periodically, you should conduct equity analyses as well and give equity increases when needed. And then just simply allow more flexibility with promotional increases. I know it's easier said than done, because sometimes, the leaders just don't want to put it in the budget. But, instead of maxing out promotions at 10%, like many companies do, offer what the role should pay. Consider the midpoint differential between the incumbent's current position and then the position that they're moving into. Review the salaries of the incumbents of the role to help determine how the employee being promoted should be paid in order to maintain that internal equity or pay parity. And just remember, equity is not the same as equality. Everyone's compensation should not be exactly the same. It should be based on the components we discussed in the previous slide, which is skill set, experience, performance, and sometimes seniority. All right, now we can go to the next slide. And here we'll discuss things to consider. As we discussed in a preceding slide, increasing pay rates for one group can result in the need to evaluate more employees and maintain proper alignment. Analyze to determine your budget or to ensure that you stay within the budget provided. Okay, just keep in mind that the effective date selected will determine the overall cost for your fiscal year. So, as you're playing around with these increased amounts, remember that adjusting the effective date can potentially help you stay within the budget allotted for the remainder of that year. That way you don't have to necessarily skim on your increased amounts. So, but just make sure that you're also clear on what your full year budget is. So now we'll get into how to calculate. We'll use one employee as an example, and this may be obvious, but I'll walk through it just in case. You would take the proposed new hourly rate or annual salary, and you would just subtract their current rate from that to get the increased amount. And if it's a full-time hourly employee, you would multiply their rate by 2,080 hours, which is 40 hours a week for 52 weeks out of the year to get the full annualized cost. Okay. If you want to determine the cost for part of the year or not the full year, then you take the annualized amount and divide it by the number of pay periods in the year. So that's going to vary depending on your company. Every company has a different, payroll schedule with a different number of pay periods. Then you want to take that number and multiply it by the remaining pay periods based on the effective date that you selected. And like I said, I'm sure many of you all are aware, but that's just a way to calculate it to, kind of help you if there's a certain budget that you're trying to stay within for the remainder of that year. It might work to just push that date back a little bit as opposed to having to give a lower increase amount. So, and I know compensation is different from payroll. I'm sure many of you have had people confuse your team for the payroll department in the past. I know I have. However, I do always think it's good practice to know your payroll calendar as a comp professional and even as an HR professional who doesn't specialize in comp. Also want to say that it's also good to, whenever possible, set guidelines for who is eligible to receive increases. You don't want to just go in blindly, make sure that you are thoughtful about this. For example, you can evaluate all employees, but you may decide to only give additional increase to employees that are below their midpoint. Or you may decide to exclude employees who are in their fourth quartile, you know. Another way that people measure is by looking at comp ratio. So you could, take that into consideration as you're making these decisions. And also keep in mind that the estimated costs will change. And I say that because I like to call this out anytime to anyone that I'm showing, an impact analysis to, a cost evaluation to. I like to keep this in mind, make sure the approvers are keeping this in mind. I call this out because most likely, business is still going to go on. Employees will still continue to be hired, transferred, promoted, terminated. These employee transactions can cause changes to the cost estimation. So just keep that in mind as you're going over these numbers with your executives. And now let's go over some challenges that you might face. Data is often lacking when attempting to complete a comprehensive pay equity analysis. Examples of missing data include education, overall years of experience, experience at a current job level. Once an employee is hired, the experience listed in their resume is discussed, during the interview process, but typically is not captured in the system. So when the organization needs to conduct a compensation analysis, these data points are normally not available to consider. Experience at the current job level should not be confused with time and position. Although time and position is a good data point, but it still does not necessarily tell you how long someone has been at their current job level. Lastly, it can be difficult to measure the knowledge, skills, and abilities needed to perform in a role. And these attributes are normally discussed during the interview process, but these data points are not always available when you're ready to analyze. More and more you hear companies promoting pay for performance, so there must be a solid way to measure and track performance. Strategic talent and performance management initiatives and processes should be implemented. All right, so now today I just want to summarize what we've gone over. We went over the importance of understanding the root causes of pay compression, strategizing intentional planning and analysis, setting guidelines, and preparing for challenges and changes. Now, let's go to the next slide, please. How can Bettercomp help? So that's what we want to discuss next. So with our credible software product, Bettercomp can easily save preferred job mappings for you. You can also market price jobs with a systematic data cut hierarchy. You can get AI recommendations for job matches. And you can also use AI to match whole job families at once. You can populate survey participation templates using the matches housed in the system. And you can also model compensation ranges. So we also have running our dashboard reporting system. So with our dashboard reports, I just gave a few examples of what you can run. So you have comp ratio reports. We have a year-over-year composite trending report. So that way you can compare, how your market data points, your market results and data track compared to your participation from the previous year. And then we also have a gap to market report, just to name a few, but there are many more reporting options that we have available as well. So just wanted to share that with you all. I appreciate, your attention.